September 13th, 1932, in Bunkie, Louisiana, in a small, very small house, which is now adjacent to the St. Anthony Parochial School in Bunkie. My father was James Travis Trimble Sr., and he was born in LaBelle, Missouri, on November the 26th, 1905. My mother was Mabel Elizabeth McNabb, and she was born in Bayagula, Louisiana, on August the 12th, 1908. When I was 5 years old, my father was transferred to a little town which is still on the map in Louisiana in the northwest corner called Tree City. It was an oil boom town, probably had no more than 75 to 100 people. We lived on a station yard in a little frame home owned by the company. There were, I think, 6 homes there on the station yard, and there was a pumping station. And my dad was the district clerk there. And I started school in Tree City. A little bit unusual first 2 years. Miss Alice Beasley was the teacher. This was a 3-room schoolhouse. Miss Beasley taught the first, second, and third grades. To the left were the first graders, in the middle were the second graders, and to the right were the third graders. She would get the first graders started on some project, such as practicing our writing, and then she would go to the second graders and get them on a project, and then she'd go to the third graders. How she managed to do all that, I don't know, but somehow or another, I did along the line learn how to read and write. My dad was transferred to Sunset, again as a district clerk, Sunset, Louisiana, between Opelousas and Lafayette. And from the 7th grade through high school, I attended school there at Sunset, graduated from Sunset High School in 1950. Well, I went to what is now University of Louisiana at Lafayette. The reason I went to SLI primarily, I guess, was it was only 15 miles from Sunset. It was within our budget. After 2 years at SLI, I made the decision to go to law school and transferred to LSU. I never grew up through grammar school and high school even with any burning desire to study law. I was fortunate enough to graduate on schedule in May of 1956, and also fortunate enough to have graduated at a time when the rules in Louisiana with regard to being a lawyer did not require graduates of accredited law schools to take the bar exam. So I did not have to go back and try to relearn 3 years worth of law, cram and take the bar exam. I was admitted in May of 1956 just by virtue of having graduated from law school. In the Air Force, I was part of the Judge Advocate General's Department. The Staff Judge Advocate was a Major Neverleff when I reported for duty at Westover Air Force Base in Massachusetts. I was appointed claims officer, which I didn't really know what that entailed at the time, but I soon found out that that meant I had to go out to people's homes when they filed claims and inspect the damage that they were claiming, and it was not a plum position. I will say that from Westover, I was transferred to Sculthorpe Air Force Base in Norfolk County, England. I had a total of 3 years in the Air Force, 1 year in Massachusetts and 2 years in England. Went to work here in Alexandria. My folks, my mother and father at the time, as well as Merle's mother and father, were living in Bunkie. We brought back with us Elise, our oldest. She was born in England in 1958. I was separated from the Air Force in June of 1959. And Elise was, I have to brag again, I think a beautiful little girl. My mother and father had always wanted a little girl, but just had the 2 boys, so she captured their hearts, and we stayed with them while I looked for a job and found work with the Gist, Murkison and Gist law firm here in Alexandria. Cameron Murkison had known my father in Bunkie, had handled a deal when my father built a home down there, and my dad had mentioned that I had graduated from law school and was in the Air Force, and Cameron said, well, when he gets out, why don't you have him come by? So I did, and we struck a deal, and I went to work at the Gist, Murkison Gist. At that time it was Mr. Gist Sr., and then there was Howard Gist Jr., DeWitt Methvin, and Cameron Murkison. They were the only folks in the firm. All of them were partners, and I was the loan associate and got a very small cubbyhole for an office. Being low man on the totem pole, I accepted whatever was thrown my way. The firm primarily represented insurance companies, and when I say the word subrogation, you'll know what I meant. And I'm sure it's probably the same way now as it was then. The insurance companies would try to get everything they could without referring the subrogation cases out to the lawyer. And so we got the dregs, and it was sometimes you'd had to try these things, and they would give you some trial experience. As far as the monetary recompense, it was little or nothing, most of the time nothing, because there wasn't anything to be had. The old adage about no blood out of a turnip. I handled some successions. I handled quite a bit of real estate work. A lot of domestic work was thrown my way, primarily because the other lawyers didn't want to do it. And they did want to keep the clients, but they didn't want to do that kind of work for the clients. So I gradually worked my way into the actual defense work, and for the last, I guess, 20 years, 18 to 20 years, almost exclusive, not exclusively, but almost exclusively, the work was in insurance defense work. In 1978, I had left the Gist firm to go to work with the Stafford firm, with Grove Stafford Jr. And that marriage lasted about as a partner, by the way. And that marriage lasted about 8 months, and I left that firm along with Harry Rando and David Smith. Harry did mainly loan closings, and David was a tax lawyer and estate planner. Lon Wilson left the Gist firm. We had hired Lon, by the way, and he left the Gist firm to come with us in about July of 1979. In about June of 1985, I was down at the office on a beautiful Sunday afternoon in June. This was not atypical. Getting ready for a trial. I took a break and picked up the Louisiana Bar Journal and saw a job for a magistrate advertised. Didn't know really what a federal magistrate was, but I looked it up and saw what they were supposed to do. I think there were about 50-something who applied for that job when I applied for it, and I was one of 12 that the panel chose to interview. So I went down to Lake Charles to be interviewed, and really didn't know any of the people on the panel, and drove back home, and I wasn't home 10 minutes when I got the call from the chairman of the committee that they had gone on and voted after they had talked things over among themselves. I think there were 9 or so members of that selection panel that they had unanimously agreed that I was their choice. That didn't mean that I was going to get the job necessarily, because the practice had been almost uniformly that the presiding judge took the recommendation of the panel, and Judge Veron did that, and he recommended me for the job, and I had to be voted on by the rest of the judges in the Western District, and was asked to meet with several of them over in Lafayette, which I did, and they went along with Judge Veron's recommendation. And so on February the 1st of 1986, I left. I had tried a lawsuit in Natchitoches, which the judge granted a directed verdict on Thursday, before I was supposed to be in Lake Charles on Friday. I don't know what I would have done if he hadn't let me out, but I did show up in Lake Charles on that Friday and was sworn in. At that time, you were appointed a federal magistrate for 7 years. If you were reappointed for another 7 years, it made a total of 14 years, and you were entitled to full retirement pay. I did not go down there with any real hope that I would be appointed a federal judge. Judge Veron died in 1990, in August, I believe, and he had taken senior status about a year before that and was pushing very hard to have me as his replacement. Then when he died, I was encouraged by a number of people to have a go at the federal judgeship, which I did, and based on a lot of luck and the help of a lot of influential people, I did get appointed a federal judge in September of 1991. From a personal standpoint, by my family, I'd like to be remembered as dedicated husband and father and grandfather, a reasonably good provider, and a reasonably good role model in their lives, and one who loves them dearly. As a lawyer, I would like to be remembered by my fellow lawyers with whom and against whom I practiced as being someone that you could count on to do what he said he was going to do. In other words, that my word was my bond, that didn't have to be put in writing if I agreed to something, that I would stick to that agreement without any question. That I was honest and that I represented my clients in a competent way, the way that clients deserve to be represented. As a judge, you know, when we select juries, when we go through the voir dire process, I don't know whether all judges do, but one of the things that I always do is tell the jury that we are looking for a jury that will provide the lawyers and the litigants with an even playing field, where there's no advantage one side or the other, that they can hear the evidence and not be influenced. So I've certainly tried to listen to the evidence, weigh the testimony of the witnesses based upon their demeanor and so forth, the various ways you're supposed to judge credibility, and then apply the law as it is. I am not a judicial activist. I don't want to make law, and I don't want to interpret statutes that have had very little, if any, interpretation in some outlandish way that would fit the way I would want the law to be. I think the law ought to be. The law is what it is, and it ought to be applied fairly and impartially, and I would like to be remembered as a judge who did that, just as we expect jurors to do in jury cases.